because you can read it in the book. I don't want to repeat what was there in the book. Coming on the plane here last night, I read Ideas for Development, which I think is a terrific book. This is the one where Robert takes some of his previous writings and muses about them. And the interesting thing about the book is that it makes this distinction between methods and behaviour, which is also in the introduction that Ian and Andrea made. And I think really Robert's great contribution has been on the behaviour side. I've been involved in the methods all the time, and I've worked with him, but it's the behaviour side that I think he's had the biggest impact and will continue to have the biggest impact. I think all of us know what it means when you really begin to change your own attitude talking to poor people through one method or another. What you begin to learn and the kind of wow factors that come up. And that's what changes not just what we're doing at that particular moment, but changes what you do later. And I sat here this morning thinking, when did I first do that? And actually, I was 16, believe it or not. When one summer, I was hired by Michael Young as one of a team that went to Milton Keynes to do semi-structured interviewing with people who'd been moved there from Bethnal Green. And it was, of course, incredible to listen to them talking about what they gained and what they lost in that whole transference. And for a middle class grammar school boy, this was a real eye-opener and let me move forward. I first worked with Robert in Ethiopia, in Wollo, a few years after the famine, and in the book it talks about all of that, and in particular how we first had our initial dispute, which was over an electric socket, rather. There was only one socket where we were standing, and he wanted it for tea and I wanted it for my computer. He, of course, won. And now, of course, it's undoubtedly true it's reversed. As Robert's got older, he's got younger. So he wants it for the computer, and I now just want it for the tea. But actually, what I'm going to talk about is one of the questions we were posed, which is challenges. I'm like Robert, I'm an optimist. But what I'm going to say now are the words of a scared optimist. We face three big things in agriculture and food production and food security. We face food price spikes, which are probably going to become more frequent. Not just affecting the developing countries, but the developed countries. I sat with a Conservative MP the other day who's really worried about food prices in her constituency. And is trying to do something about it. Spoken in Parliament about it. Secondly, the billion hungry. More than ever we've had on the planet before. The billion, of course, is a bit of an artifact of FAO and how it's calculated and everything else, and we desperately need survey methods linked with qualitative PRAs to really understand hunger on the ground. And it's a very good one for Rwanda. 6,000 families being looked at, which lays out much more clearly than we've ever had before the nature of vulnerability to survey. And then the third thing is that we've got to feed the planet by 2050. Now, you should say, he won't be around. Why is he worried? We're going to have to cope with population increase, which is actually the easiest. Just on the current trends, we could do that. We're going to have to cope with changes in consumption patterns because of rising per capita incomes and the switch to livestock and other Western-style foods in East Asian countries. Going to cope with the demand for biofuels. We've also got factors affecting supply, energy prices, fertilizer prices peaked and are going back up again. Land, we're not going to have more land. We're going to have to produce the food on the land we've got. And it's deteriorating. And the same goes for water. It's getting less, and it's deteriorating. We've got problems with increasing yields, particularly of some crops like wheat. And we've got climate change. If we get to 2 degrees, we could probably cope. But we're on track for 3 to 4 degrees. And when we get to 4 degrees, the temperatures in North Africa and South Africa are going to be not 5 degrees above present. They're going to be 7, 8, 9 degrees above present. They won't be able to grow wheat and maize in Africa. And we'll have more extreme events. Don't we all know that? Haven't we seen it already? In Britain, every month is a record, right? It's the hottest, wettest, driest, coldest, most hailstormy, most whatever month on record. If you go to Africa and you talk to villagers and say to them, is the climate changing? They say, yeah, of course it is. What's changing? They'll tell you what's changing. You say, are you doing anything about it? You know, this is one of these, you know, participatory, semi-structured interviews where the people look at you in complete disbelief that you're asking these stupid questions. And then you say, what is it you're doing? And then they tell you what they're doing. I said this in Washington, D.C. this week, and I said, you know, maybe all of you here in this audience don't believe in climate change, but virtually everybody in Africa does. I think there was a sort of silence in the room. Now, the challenge about all of these is that I'm afraid we're going to need both top-down and bottom-up approaches. We're going to need top-down if we're going to have the real kind of investment that's needed in low-carbon energy production, for example. We're going to need top-down for the GIS and other techniques that are going to have to be applied on a big scale so that we can make red work and hopefully eventually get money into the hands of farmers for carbon sequestration. But of course you're also going to need bottom-up participatory approaches by farmers and forest dwellers to make this work. And that's going to be true of everything. I want also to say that everybody has really nice glib answers to this. Like, well, we should stop all eating meat, no problem. And then you say, well, half of all the pig meat in the world is eaten by the Chinese. Do you really think you're going to change Chinese dietary habits over the next 30 years? Agriculture is cursed by extremes. We all know this. It's either organic or GM. It's either big farms or small farms. It's either big irrigation or water harvesting. It's either surveys or PRAs. We've got to get out of this because in nearly all situations it's both and. Francis said it this morning beautifully about surveys and PRA approaches. She didn't get clapped, just by me, but not by nobody else. And the third thing that's going to go in this mix is the private sector. We've had virtually nothing about the private sector, and we probably aren't going to get anything about the private sector. This isn't a private sector kind of gang of people, right? Because, you know, you think that by the private sector you mean Monsanto and Pepsi and all the rest of it. And of course they do have a role to play. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, for example, what's going on in Africa at the moment, which is large amounts of money from the big banks, from Standard & Chartered and from Rabobank and others, being channeled to agro-dealers, to little dealers in villages as microcredit. That kind of private sector. And of course, the private sector that's producing the new seed companies in Africa. 40 new seed companies being created in East Africa recently. I talked to Josephine Ockott, who's the young woman who founded Victoria Seeds in Uganda, and she says, she woke up the other morning and went to the warehouse, and there were great lines of farmers queuing up to buy seed. We have to keep remembering that there's a huge private sector in Africa and Asia. It's called farmers. And they deal in the private sector. And they need incomes. It's not just sustainable existence. It's sustainable development we're after. So the challenge somehow, and I don't know the answers to this, but that's why I'm saying this, is somehow in dealing with all these things I've described, we've got to meld in a participatory fashion the top down and the bottom up. And meld that too with real private sector investment in what smallholders need if they're going to get incomes in addition to feeding themselves.